So this theory is that the way the Great Pyramid was set up was not set up as a tomb, but was set up as some sort of a way to generate electricity.
The pyramid was the national project of the whole nation.
What was the Great Pyramid? It's a question that's been asked by millions. We're going to head inside the pyramid to answer that question. We can all agree just by looking at it that it is really big. It is enormous. 2.5 million cubic meters of stones moved here. But when it comes to what it was, it sometimes seems like everybody has their own personal opinions.
My own personal theory is that Joseph built the pyramids in order to store grain. Now, all the archaeologists think that they were made for the pharaoh's graves, but, it would have to be something awfully big. When you stop and think about it, I don't think it would just disappear over the course of time to store that much grain. And when you look at the way the pyramids are made, with many chambers that are hermetically sealed, they would have to be that way for a reason. And, various scientists have said, well, there were alien beings that came down and they have special knowledge, and that's how they were. It doesn't require an alien being when God is with you.
That was Dr. Ben Carson, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And that is not his own personal opinion. And this idea that the Hebrew patriarch Joseph built the pyramids as granaries goes all the way back to the early Middle Ages. In Book 41 of Genesis, the story is told how Joseph interpreted the dreams of the Pharaoh. And he interpreted them as being 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. So his advice to the Pharaoh was to store up grain during the 7 years of plenty. The pyramids are not once mentioned in the Bible, not in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament. So the idea that the pyramids were the granaries here in this biblical story, that only was first started in the medieval period, after hieroglyphs could no longer be read. St. Gregory of Tours in the History Francorum in the 6th century AD.
Joseph built wonderful granaries of squared stone and rubble. They are wide at the base and narrow at the top in order that the wheat might be cast into them through a tiny opening.
Now, Gregory's story is very compelling. You drop in the grain from the top and then it widens out at the base. But to anybody that actually travels to the pyramids and sees it with your own eyes, you can tell immediately these are not granaries. You just have to go inside. So travelers in the Middle Ages who went to the pyramids, they constantly had to debunk this myth. So, for example, William von Boldenseil in the 14th century writes,
"The simple people of the country say that these were Pharaoh's barns and granaries in which Joseph had the wheat kept in the time of the great famine mentioned in the Bible. But this cannot be true at all, for no place for putting in the wheat can be found there, and there is, inside these columns, no empty space where anything can be placed."
So we can see immediately if you go in, there's just no room for there to be wheat stored in the pyramids. It's too tight. Look at this. I'm in the largest chamber with the magic of green screen, the Grand Gallery. You could not hold that much wheat in here at all. Boldenseil continues.
"There is a very small door quite high above the ground, and a very narrow and very dark little passage through which one descends there for a certain distance. It is not all wide enough to put grain in, as those of the country say and believe."
It's something that reflects the Christian and Islamic tendencies of the Middle Ages to try to see the Bible in all the great monuments of antiquity. Eyewitness testimony that you can see with your own eyes is what can debunk myths about the pyramids and also bring us closer to what they actually were. I recently had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Zahi Hawass, who has helped guide my thoughts on this entire presentation. What are some of the most sensational claims you've heard about Giza?
No, every day there is something different. Every day, every person has a theory. People can say that pyramids were used to make electricity. Others say that was used to be a store for the wheat for Prophet Joseph. The two Italians who claimed 600 feet under the second pyramid, you have these 8 pillars. And recently, someone, his name is Dr. Warner, who claimed that Jesus Christ is buried underneath the pyramid.
Wow. I mean, these theories for what they were are a dime a dozen, and many of them are conspiracy theories, and many of them can literally be disproven with just the cold hard evidence that you can see in front of your eyes. For example, this famous conspiracy about Dr. Zahi Hawass's bathroom that he told Joe Rogan recently.
It happened, but it's a joke. A reporter came to see me from California to my office, and my office was located next to the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And he said to me, people say at 12 noon, you leave your office and you go to the bathroom and you open a tunnel from your bathroom. Really, it's what he said. And you go from the tunnel to the Great Pyramid and you hide things and you come back. I said, okay, what do you need from me now? He said, I want to see your bathroom. This really happened. He went to my bathroom.
Did he check all the panels?
And he came back. I said, have you seen any tunnels in my bathroom? He said, no.
It's with evidence that we can start to understand what the pyramid actually was. But the reality is that the Great Pyramid has a great big problem. The great big problem is that there actually is so little evidence for what the Great Pyramid is, which is why all these mysteries and ideas proliferate in the general public. Because the reality is that there are only a handful of artifacts that have ever been found in the Great Pyramid. These are two of them. These are the Wayneman-Dixon relics. They're found in the British Museum today. They were found in the air shafts of the Queen's Chamber behind a little bit of blocking in the walls. And these are really the only artifacts that we have from the Great Pyramid. And this contrasts with 21st century archaeology. I'm an archaeologist. I've been doing archaeology in Egypt and Greece and Italy and France for 25 years. And every single site I've ever worked on has tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of artifacts. Sometimes archaeology is compared to forensics. We piece together all the various traces and clues, and we have lots of evidence usually. But when it comes to the Great Pyramid, it's a problem because we don't have this evidence. We don't have pottery. We don't have bones. We don't have stone tools. We don't have all the various artifacts that help us put together the picture of a site, which makes it a real challenge. Now, the reason the Great Pyramid has so little evidence is because of its history. People have been going in and out of the Great Pyramid for thousands of years. And we even know just from our early records from medieval Arabic texts and from early European adventurers and explorers and people we wouldn't really call archaeologists, that they were on an adventure. This was not science, this was not forensics, this was not an evidence-based approach. This was oftentimes a holiday. Sunbathing on the top of the pyramid. There's nothing methodical and rigorous about the study of the pyramids until really the 20th century. In fact, many of these early explorers, they damaged and destroyed the evidence and they left the records for us. Colonel Howard Vyse, one of the first to write a detailed book on explorations into the pyramids in the 19th century, he blew it up with gunpowder. Right in the middle of the pyramid, he set off kegs of gunpowder to open up new chambers, destroying plentiful evidence that we would normally carefully collect and record in the process. Similarly, we have records of early Italian explorer Giovanni Battista Caviglia just hammering away with pickaxes in the ends of the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, just digging randomly into the stones. So these early explorers, they destroyed and plundered and lost much of our evidence. And you can really contrast this with the kind of forensic scene that we normally see, even from who we call real archaeologists, William Flinders Petrie, who really established Egyptology as a kind of scientific approach. But by our standards, he was way behind. For example, we all know that the Egyptologists say that it was Pharaoh Khufu who built the Great Pyramid. But there's only one single representation of Khufu. And the story behind how it's found is absolutely fascinating. In 1903, in Abydos, Flinders Petrie was digging in the Temple of Osiris. And while there, one of his workmen handed him a headless statuette, a small one, but he could make out the cartouche on it and it said Khufu. The head was missing though, so he stopped work, they stopped all excavation, and what he had them do was sieve all of the back dirt so that he could find the head of Khufu. The head of Khufu had been hacked off accidentally by one of the workmen because they weren't digging very carefully, and it took them 3 whole weeks of sifting through the back dirt until they found the head. And it's because of this that we can now see the face of Khufu, clearly identified by his name on the statuette. But it shows that the methods from 1903 are nothing like the methods today, where everything would be carefully sieved as you dig it, and you would not be hacking through statues, statuettes, and artifacts. So when it comes to the pyramids, what we're stuck with is so little evidence and so much mystery because of the history of these excavations. What do you think the pyramids are, Tavro? They were for cats, weren't they? Even as Tavro tells us, he thinks the pyramids had to do with cats. Maybe the cats underneath. And what that leads to, this huge mystery and lack of evidence, is people just making shit up.
And I believe that the Nile, when it used to run up close to the pyramids, and the water would run underneath the pyramid, and that would create something called physiostatic electricity as it ran underneath that magnetized crystal granite. Those ions would pour up into the chamber, move up the grand gallery where there used to be resonating rods, where you can see the slots where the rods used to be. They're removed now, but the slots are still there. Then it would be pushed into the king's chamber where it would be amplified and some type of fusion would take place, then forced up through the apex, and then the crystal granite obelisks around the region would capture that ambient wireless electricity. And then if you had something called a JED, which looks like a Tesla coil, you can capture that energy and you can transfer it into a device for gold electroplating, for any other electrical tools you need, like some of the tools they had to have used to create some of these incredible works of art. We can see the tool marks, so we know they had the tools. But they had wireless electricity way back then.
If that's true, that's insane. Because you would think there would be some kind of physical evidence of a device, like something left over, some sort of a, ancient chainsaw,
right,
like something.
Yeah, they did a great job cleaning up. I mean, they poured sand over Giza to bury another couple hundred pyramids there at Giza.
I mean, that's the reality. There's no chainsaws, there's no magnetized crystals. This is all just fantasy. We need to work with evidence. It's the same thing when it comes to aliens.
Joe, if aliens build the pyramids, do they leave any? Do they shit sometimes? Aren't they going to shit?
Maybe aliens don't shit.
If they don't shit, are they
Everyone
going to leave something on the ground? On the contrary, I give you the evidence, every evidence that I will tell you today.
Of actual workers.
And what's happening.
And that's the reality of what archaeology is. So in order to answer the question about what the Great Pyramid actually was, I think we need to return to the first principles of archaeology, the way in which archaeologists interpret the past from the evidence that we have. And it's from this kind of core foundation of how archaeologists look at the archaeological record that we can work from the known, the tangible physical evidence that we have in front of us, that we can measure and replicate our measurements on, that we can test chemically, or that we can make different observations on. We can touch, we can see, we can feel. And it's from there that we can then work from the known to the unknown to put together our history.
Archaeology is science. It's not speculation. And I can't tell you that the Statue of Liberty was built by aliens. What's my proof? What's your proof for that?
Then well, I heard the aliens left behind a shit.
Then when I did excavate the area beside the Sphinx, all what we discovered in the bottom, all kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, Roman, nothing underneath the Old Kingdom. If anyone built the Sphinx before that, they should leave something on the ground.
Of course. So as we can see, archaeology is very much a science. It's bound by evidence. And when it comes to the Great Pyramid, we actually have quite a lot of physical evidence for the architecture. At its base, it's 230 meters. Its height is 146 meters. Its volume is 2.5 million cubic square meters, made up of about 2.3 million stones that on average weigh about 2 tons. And what's so amazing about the pyramid, of course, is how precise it is. It's oriented to true north within 3 minutes, 6 seconds of an arc of a degree. Absolutely phenomenal. At its base, it's level to within 2 centimeters. I don't even know if I can make my hand level within 2 centimeters. Just phenomenal. And the difference in the length on the different sides is about 4.5 centimeters. So this is extremely precise. Now, don't get me wrong. This is nowhere near the precision that we can achieve today with our modern technology. The only reason we can see these imperfections is because we can map more precisely today. But at the same time, it's quite impressive. The physical evidence also includes the layout inside the Great Pyramid. When you enter the entrance, you walk on a passageway going down, called the descending passageway. If you follow that straight down through the superstructure of the pyramid that it was built around, and then carved into the bedrock underneath, you enter a subterranean chamber. This descending passageway also forks off into a different passage that goes upwards, the ascending passageway, which will take you to the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, and ultimately to the center of the pyramid, the King's Chamber. There's other more ambiguous features to the pyramid, which we'll talk about a little bit, such as the air shafts, the escape shaft, and the big and the small void. But many of these ambiguous features are not going to help us understand what the Great Pyramid was. But what all these facts that are often repeated, what they don't tell us is what the heck the pyramid was. And that's what we want to get into today. What's the evidence for what the pyramid was? At the beating heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza is the key to understanding it. And that is this right here, the sarcophagus. It's very clearly a sarcophagus, a stone vessel the size to fit a human body. But of course, this evidence does not convince everybody.
I've been in Giza 3 times, and there's nothing about the Great Pyramid that resembles anything like a tomb.
There's nothing in the Great Pyramid that resembles a tomb? Are you kidding me? There's a frigging coffin right there. There's a giant sarcophagus that is really clearly a sarcophagus. So I don't care if you've been to Giza 3 times, 10 times, this is just a lie. This is not just called a sarcophagus because it vaguely looks like a sarcophagus. It exactly matches other sarcophagi from ancient Egypt. For example, we can compare it to the 3rd dynasty sarcophagus of Akhet, who preceded Khufu by about 50 years, or to his mother, Hetepheres I. Both had plain sarcophagi that are very similar to Khufu's. An even more direct comparison is in the pyramid next door. The Middle Pyramid of Khafra has a granite sarcophagus that looks exactly like Khufu's. Similarly, Khafra's wife, Marisank III, we have her sarcophagus. Again, it's a nice plain sarcophagus, just as is the sarcophagus of later pharaohs such as Dedi. So we have this web of connections which we can use to say that we're not just calling this a sarcophagus for the sake of calling it a sarcophagus. It actually looks like all the other Egyptian sarcophagi from this period that we have. But this still doesn't convince people. After all, maybe the sarcophagus was a later addition.
I'm in the camp that the Egyptians found the pyramids, not built them. But I'm glad Zahi's not here.
Well, that would, get you to the ancient civilization theory.
Ah, yes, this old chestnut. The Egyptians found the pyramids in the middle of a desert. And when you're presented with a scene like this, the pyramids of Giza, what do? You turn it into a cemetery. This is now your royal cemetery, right? This is the idea here. I don't know how anybody comes up with this idea, but I promise you, it's easy to disprove it. The real key to disproving this hypothesis is this sarcophagus in the King's Chamber. Flinders Petrie in 1883 carefully measured the sarcophagus and everything in the Great Pyramid in order to understand it. He came down to within a fraction of an inch the measurements on all the passageways and on the sarcophagus itself. And guess what? The sarcophagus is too fucking big. As Petrie wrote in 1883,
"The coffer cannot have been put into the pyramid after the king's chamber was finished. It is nearly an inch wider than the beginning of the ascending passage. The only conclusion, then, is that the coffer was placed in the king's chamber before the roof was put on."
So look, the size of the sarcophagus, physical dimensions that can be checked and corroborated, make it clear that it is simply too big to have been brought in after the pyramid was finished. The sarcophagus itself was part of the construction of the pyramid. It was brought into the king's chamber before the king's chamber was roofed and before it was finished. It's the only possible explanation given the physical evidence of the size of the sarcophagus and the size of the passageways around it. It's part of the construction. It's part of the fabric of the pyramid, which means it's really clear evidence that the pyramid either was a tomb or it's a cenotaph. It's intended to resemble a tomb. There's no other explanation given that the sarcophagus is part of its construction. And I want to emphasize this is true for our other pyramids throughout Egypt. For example, Flinders Petrie made the exact same measurements to check out the sarcophagus in Khafre's pyramid next door, which is in a subterranean chamber. And Petrie wrote,
"This coffer, being 42.0 inches wide, can never have been taken through the passages, as the upper passage is only 41.3 wide, and the lower is 41.2 and 41.6. Hence it must have been put into the chamber before the roofing was laid over it, and so before the pyramid was built upon that."
So here we have the smoking gun. The sarcophagus clearly designates part of the story of the function of the pyramid. There has to be something mortuary and funerary about it. Wouldn't you agree, Tavro? I think Tavro agrees with me here. He's slowly convinced that this was not a cat-sized sarcophagus. So the sarcophagus is the first piece of physical evidence that really starts to get at what the pyramid was. However, there's more. If we leave the heart of the pyramid, the king's chamber, we move from there to the antechamber right in front. And this is a key physical space that gives us another sense of the function of the pyramid. You can see these grooves on the side. This is where the portcullis was. The portcullis is one of several pieces of physical evidence for the defense system that was designed into the Great Pyramid itself. 3 granite slabs were lowered down to seal the king's chamber after the funeral of the pharaoh Khufu. We have remnants of these granite slabs that were hacked into pieces centuries ago. And you can see the grooves in the stones to understand how they worked. Here, let's let Matt Simpson of Ancient Architects explain it and show it to us.
In this picture we can see large semicircular grooves between the pilasters of the antechamber, and these would have housed wooden rollers which lowered each portcullis into place with the use of ropes, which is better shown in this diagram showing a side view.
Go check out his full video because we have a very clear sense of how this portcullis worked. We have all the different parts to it to understand how it was sealed, and that we have the slabs that show that it was sealed. But that's not all. The defense system for the Great Pyramid extends beyond just this one feature, these 3 slabs in the antechamber to the king's chamber. If we continue through the Grand Gallery, at the very end of the ascending passage where it meets the descending passage, there are 3 massive granite plugs. Each of these must have been installed during the construction of the pyramid because, again, they would not fit through the passageway. They're designed to be large enough that they sealed through. And these 3 granite plugs were pushed into the juncture between the descending and the ascending passageway to make sure that nobody could get through to the queen and the king's chamber. In the Grand Gallery, a series of niches on the side that we can still see today, they tell us about the kinds of wooden scaffolding that were in place in this space. So these granite plugs would have been stored here. They would have been put in a series of steps to carefully lower these granite plugs down the Grand Gallery and then slid and pushed into the ascending passageway. And then the final detail that Petrie records is that plaster was put around the granite plugs to seal them firmly. Finally, we can therefore see the subterranean chamber, the easy access from the entrance all the way down below the bedrock of the pyramid itself. This can be seen as a decoy chamber, something that looks like it should be a burial chamber, but either it was never completed or it was robbed already, hopefully deterring looters. Even Mr. Beast got this point very clearly.
When we first discovered this, we came into here, this massive chamber, and nothing was found.
Why was it empty?
That's another decoy.
They went through all this effort just to create a decoy chamber.
Correct.
Proving that the pyramids were built as tombs for the kings of Egypt.
So as you can see, this whole intricate defense system was part of the design of the pyramid itself. We understand from pyramids prior to Khufu and pyramid texts after Khufu that the Egyptians were obsessed with stopping looting. They knew that their tombs were being looted. The final piece of tangible physical evidence that gives a clue to the function of the pyramid is the writing itself in the pyramids. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard there's no hieroglyphs in the Great Pyramid.
When it comes to the topic of hieroglyphs, no hieroglyphs of any kind have ever been found carved into any wall inside of the Great Pyramid, meaning that whoever built it didn't feel the need to put them there. And to take it a step further, no hieroglyphs specifically mentioning who built the pyramids, let alone how they did it, have ever been found anywhere in Egypt. To this day, the only legitimate reference to Khufu we've even found is this small statue, which may or may not actually be Khufu, and was found nowhere near the Great Pyramid. Once again, showing that these mainstream theories about the Great Pyramid of Giza are nothing more than a weak hypothesis at best.
These mainstream theories are nothing more than a weak hypothesis at best. Why not be like Patrick James and just lie to 9 million people on YouTube, ignoring all the evidence we actually have? The fact that Khufu's name is on the statuette that Petrie found. The fact that there is a sarcophagus, and the fact that we have hieroglyphs inside the Great Pyramid. Don't believe me? Let's let Dr. Hawass show you.
Jimmy, come here. This is one of the names of the gangs who built the pyramids. Iber means teen, Simsu means friends, Cartouche, Khufu, Khufu.
This means the group friends/gang of Khufu, and that was written 4,600 years ago.
Exactly.
The hieroglyphs are all found above the king's chamber, and this is where that gunpowder that Colonel Howard Weiss set off comes into play. So above the king's chamber, a chamber called Davison's Chamber was discovered by Davison in the 18th century. Howard Weiss, when he was there, he decided he wanted to explore even higher above the king's chamber. So he set off a series of gunpowder explosions, day in, day out, until he came upon a series of empty spaces above the king's chamber, each set between the massive granite slabs that make the roof of the king's chamber itself. Colonel Weiss records,
several quarry marks were inscribed in red upon the blocks, particularly on the western side. This apartment was evidently intended for the same purpose as those below it, that is to say, to carry off the weight of the building from the king's chamber. Mr. Perring sent his drawings of the quarry marks in Wellington's chamber to Mr. Birch of the British Museum.
Birch from the British Museum replied, "The symbols or hieroglyphics traced in red by the sculptor or mason upon the stones in the chambers of the Great Pyramid are apparently quarry marks, although not very legible, owing to their having been written in semi-hieratic or linear hieroglyphic characters." There's a whole series of red paintings on these stones. These chambers were there to make it so that the weight was not as great on the king's chamber, which we know was a worry for them because of the crack in one of the granite ceiling slabs in the king's chamber. And so this helped relieve some of the weight, and these stones were never finished because they were not in a visible area of the pyramid. It was fully sealed off. Nobody could get there until Colonel Weiss blew up his way in. And in each of these chambers, we have these quarry marks. They identify the gangs, the work gangs. Some of them are actually linear lines that are there to help place stones and to fit together the architecture. When you build a building, you make notations and markers and notes. It's the kind of notations that you have if you've ever put together something from IKEA. Each of the parts is labeled, and then you have drawings that show you how they slot them together. This is the kind of stuff that tells us the inner workings of how these pyramids were built. Dr. Hawass told me that for the first time in over 100 years, new marks were found in these chambers. It's amazing. I think it's these connections between archaeology and textual sources that can help people hopefully believe the truth about the pyramids. And so one of the ones that I thought was really great when you had Mr. Beast there and you showed him around, you showed those hieratic inscriptions inside the relieving chambers, naming Khufu's work gangs, right? The quarry marks. And,
we have five names now that were found inside the 5 chambers. 2 of them were found recently. The first one in the 3rd room say though the gangs who are connected with the goddess Wadjet, and Wadjet was goddess connected with the king. And beside that, it's written year 13 of Khufu's reign. In the room number 4, another gang name was found through CD, and this was found 6 months ago. It said the good God, and also mention year 13 of Khufu's reign. Then inside the 5 chamber now, we have 5 names of the gangs who built the pyramids, and mentioning year 13 written by the workmen before they moved the stones.
Now this is absolutely amazing. Not only do these quarry marks tell us about how the pyramid was built, it tells us exactly who built them and when. These blocks were placed or carved during the 13th year of Khufu's reign, a very specific point in time. And since this chamber was completely sealed off and inaccessible without gunpowder, we know that these are part of the construction of the pyramid itself. Now, I want to be clear. At the time that Colonel Vise found the quarry marks for the first time, these were somewhat unique. But by this point, quarry marks that are very similar have been found all over Egypt, in quarries, in monuments, in tombs, anywhere you can look. For example, on the Red Pyramid, built by Khufu's father, Sneferu, there are a series of quarry marks that were found. These marks were found on the casing stones, the fine white Tura limestone that lined the pyramid itself. And near the base, one of them says, bringing to earth the western cornerstone, counting year 15, 2 cubits, which Mark Lehner clarifies because the census is done every other year. This would actually be in the 29th or 30th year of Sneferu's reign when these blocks were placed. And then 30 courses higher, the excavator Stottleman found yet another series of quarry marks that dated to 4 years after that. So we have a clear sense of how long it takes to go up 30 courses when laying out the casing stones. There are books and articles devoted to these kind of quarry marks, control notes, the kinds of lines and team marks that are made on stones for Egyptian construction. There are hundreds and thousands of examples around Egypt that provide good comparison to those found above the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. For example, in the Western Desert, south of Dakhla, inscribed on the rock face, it mentions the year after the 13th time of counting the cattle. So that would be the 27th year of Khufu's reign. He ordered 2 overseers of recruits to lead an expedition of some 400 men into the desert to collect mefat, which is actually probably that red pigment that we saw in the king's chamber. In the 27th year this is happening of Khufu's reign. In the boat burials next to the Great Pyramids, we have the name of Jejefre, Khufu's son and successor. So we know that he was the one that presided over the funeral of Khufu at the Great Pyramid. Or later on at the Pyramid of Khentkawes II, we have quarry marks that tell us when construction paused in year 10 and then when it resumed later on. Or there's the Pyramid of Amenemhet III, where there's a graffito that mentions the 2nd year of his reign, which gives us a sense that the pyramid building starts immediately when the new pharaoh takes control of power. So what we have here is a series of interlocking evidence that we can see all over Egypt that gives us a sense of the authenticity and what these quarry marks above Khufu's king's chamber tell us. And what's really cool is the dates all line up with another set of physical evidence. These dates that we have in writing to Khufu and year 13 of his reign that Zahi Hawass has just found, or to those that mention the 27th year of his reign, the radiocarbon dates from the Great Pyramid line up very closely. They date quite precisely to the Old Kingdom in Egypt, and new Bayesian modeling by D et al. Show they actually line up quite closely with the historical dates that we have. I know there's all sorts of YouTube videos that say they don't. That's just not true. These radiocarbon dates, what they are taken from is from little bits of charcoal found in the mortar in the packing stones of the pyramid. So it's not the exterior, it's not due to repairs, it's from the core of the pyramid that dozens of radiocarbon dates have been taken, as well as dozens of radiocarbon dates from monuments, other pyramids around Egypt, and they all line up well with our historical evidence. In fact, the evidence of when the pyramid was built is so convincing that it even changed Graham Hancock's mind.
I accept Egyptological opinion, the Great Pyramids were built in 2500 BC. I am not saying that the pyramids were built earlier than that.
So this physical evidence is just too much to dispute. Any theories about the mysteries of what the Great Pyramid was needs to account for this set of physical evidence. That is rule number one of archaeology. You cannot forget the physical, tangible evidence that you can touch, see, feel, measure, test. If you want to dispute it, leave a comment, feel free. But you're going to have to deal with the fact that we have a web of interlocking evidence that gives us the sense of when the Great Pyramid was built and that it had some sort of funerary purpose. We'll get into that, especially in a future video, about whether there was a mummy or not. But for now, I want to focus on that web, because that is the next of the first principles of archaeology upon which we work from the known to the unknown. Context is everything. So we have this physical evidence in the Great Pyramid itself, but as you can see, to understand it and interpret it, we compare that evidence with evidence nearby in Giza and also within Egypt itself. We can compare the sarcophagus of Khufu to other sarcophagi. We can compare those quarry marks to other quarry marks. And we can compare the pyramid itself to other tombs and other pyramids. The context of Giza is especially important, from its geology to its archaeology. It really tells us a lot about the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, we located exactly the location of the quarry for the Great Pyramid and the second pyramid and the third one. Then the reason for a king switch from a site to another site is to look for a limestone. But Giza Plateau is the best of all the sites, because it's a part of the Mokattam Formation. And the stones in the site consist of 3 levels. Level 1 and 2 are very bad stones. But level 3 is the best quality of the stones that the Egyptian used in building the 3 pyramids at Giza. This is why the pyramids of Giza are more spectacular than others, because of the quality of the stones in the site. And if you look, people do not go to Dashur. They never look at the pyramids of Senefru.
So I like that red pyramid. That's one of my favorites.
It's used at the Great Pyramid. Why do you talk about it?
Yeah.
Why do you say that? Why do you concentrate only on the Great Pyramid? Because you don't know. You only look at the Great Pyramid. You don't look at others. If you go to Dashur and see other pyramids and go to the Step Pyramid and go how pyramids built and look at pyramids dynasty 5 and 6 and the Middle Kingdom, every period has a trend that the Egyptians show that trend.
It's this context, the geological context, the archaeological context, the spatial context, the chronological and the cultural context that archaeologists use to build narratives about the past, to work from the known to the unknown. And one of the key steps that we have to take as archaeologists is we need to step out of our own shoes. We need to think like an Egyptian. After all, if you go to the British Museum and you look at the cat mummies, would you really mummify your own cat? I don't think I would. But then again, I'm not an Egyptian. Sometimes it's hard to think like an Egyptian. After all, I don't think I'd ever mummify Tavro here. It's just not my style. But the Egyptians, they would have mummified you, little guy. You would be a mummy. You'd be a little cat mummy in the British Museum if you lived in ancient Egypt. Thank God we found him on Crete. And this is really key. When you hear about people applying modern engineering and modern construction and modern thoughts on the pyramids, we need to remember, you got to check your perspective. The Egyptians were very smart, intelligent people, and they left for us a record of their perspective. For example, plentiful tomb paintings showing how they moved stones that weighed over 60 tons, like this statue here, where they dragged it across the sand using water to reduce the friction. We have this kind of evidence for the construction. We have this kind of evidence for the function of the pyramids, but we need to check our own ego and try to put ourselves in the shoes of the Egyptians. And for that, we have to go first to the hieroglyphs. For example, when you discuss, why do Egyptologists think that a pyramid equals tomb? Well, you do realize that the hieroglyphic sign for pyramid, mer, shaped and looks like a pyramid, it meant tomb. It meant pyramid, but it also just meant tomb, even non-pyramidal tombs. We know this from plentiful texts. So when you say, what's the evidence that the pyramids were tombs? Well, Ding, 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 the Egyptians told us that they were tombs. And the etymology of this term also means the place of ascension, and that then relates to the Great Pyramid itself. The name of the Great Pyramid was specifically Akhet Khufu, which means the horizon of Khufu, where Khufu's soul would have ascended into the heavens. It's the horizon that one sees. And we have this name attested many, many, many times. From the 4th dynasty, from the time of Khufu's reign, all the way down through the history of Egypt until hieroglyphs were forgotten. For example, here you're looking at a tombstone of the supervisor of funerary priests of Akhet Khufu on a tomb from Giza right next to the pyramid. Or this clay seal mentioning the priestly rites of Akhet Khufu, which is from the 1st millennium BCE, so we're talking 2,000 years later. This was the name that was used from, 4,500 years ago, all the way down for several thousand years. The name is quite clear. Now let's think about how you read hieroglyphs. We've seen, for example, some of these hieroglyphs before. You can see very clearly Khufu's name. We see it in the Great Pyramid. We see it on his statuette. That is his cartouche that identifies who he is. We see it all over the place in Egypt.
This is the master of a man called Ka. It's one of the ones that you can visit. You can buy a ticket to go and visit. This is a part of the tomb where, as is quite common, you get the name of the tomb owner and also a series of their titles. This one invokes the name of the pyramid town of Khufu, which we can see here. So Ka was in fact the Imi Newt, the overseer of the pyramid town, Akhet Khufu. And Akhet Khufu is the pyramid complex, or the town associated with the pyramid complex. And if you look closely here, you'll see that the words Akhet Khufu, Khufu appears first in the sequence due to honorific transposition. It's the most important part of the phrase. The Akhet is written with a little pyramid determinative sign, as is the newt part at the end here as well. So Imi means overseer, and then the newt, that circular sign with a little semicircular T sign underneath it, is then followed at the right hand end by another pyramid sign. So it's absolutely clear that the Akhet Khufu and the Imi newt make reference to the pyramid here. So there's a clear reference to these as having been part of Khufu's funerary provision.
Now this name is very appropriate because it has to do with the ascension of the soul of Khufu into the horizon, which then helps us explain some of the more ambiguous features we have, like these air passageways. The one on the north side is pointed exactly at the circumpolar stars, the North Stars, and the one on the south side is pointed exactly at the star of Sirius associated with Osiris. And this is something that we recognize from other pyramids in Egypt. For example, the very first pyramid, the Step Pyramid of Djoser, there's a statue of Djoser in a little niche called a serdab. And carved into the stone are eye holes, little peepholes. And his statue, the eyes of his statue are peering out of the peepholes up at a 13-degree angle directly towards those circumpolar stars, the same place one of those air shafts is facing. So you could think of them as little peepholes through which the pharaoh god would ascend to the heavens, to the horizon. And this idea of religious funerary texts and their conception of the afterlife, this is recorded in many, many texts from the Old Kingdom onwards. So, for example, in the pyramid texts of Unas, in the 5th dynasty, there's a note saying,
"The glory of the king is in the sky. His power is in the horizon."
You can see that this is an appropriate name for the pyramid, and it matches up with the physical evidence that we have, that we can now start moving from the known, the sarcophagus is too big, to the unknown. What could these enigmatic air shafts have meant, and why were they built into the pyramid? And so it's the depth of detail that Egyptian hieroglyphs, what the Egyptians have left for us, that help us interpret the context of the function of the Great Pyramid. And so the connections between our written evidence and the physical archaeological evidence, it forms a tight web through which we can understand the construction of the pyramid and all the different characters that were involved. For example, Zahi tells us about an individual named Dedi.
The tomb that they found for Dedi.
Like P. Diddy?
Dedi, yes.
See, this is why you have to check your perspective, Joe, because this is not P. Diddy. This is Dedi. Let's hear about who Dedi is.
Is someone from the public who really mentioned in a papyri, and in archaeology you see him and you see his name. Then what I am saying, that everything that we say, we do have evidence about it through excavation, because you reveal always secret from the sand. And I really believe that on what we discover of hieroglyphic, we translate of evidence inside the pyramid or outside the pyramid.
And so using this combination of written evidence and physical evidence, we can put together the entire Giza network that stretches from Khufu at the top to his family working out, to the workers and workmen and other officials and priests. We have evidence for them all in this tight sort of interlocking web, and it's really quite revealing. It gives you a sense of the depth of our archaeological and historical evidence upon which these stories and these narratives are created. So at Giza, the key point obviously is the Great Pyramid. That was what transformed it into this cemetery. This is for Khufu. We have the evidence of Pharaoh Khufu written into the pyramid itself. Just next to it is the middle pyramid, and that is the pyramid to Khufu's son, Khafre. And just next to that one is the pyramid of Khufu's grandson, Menkaure. We have all of this written down in text. This is not a mystery at all. But this web is so much deeper than that. We have the entirety of Khufu's family basically buried in this cemetery. For example, we have his mom, Queen Hetepheres I, which is just an amazing story of an unlooted tomb because it was hidden. We also have the tomb of the grand architect of the Great Pyramid itself, Hemiunu, Khufu's cousin. His statue is actually quite impressive, is it not? Similarly, we have the tombs of their wives. For example, the tomb of Marasank III, who is Khafre's wife. And that tomb shows some beautiful hieroglyphs. It shows her even. It's really quite nice. She died at a young age, and her mom ended up using the tomb that was being built for her and buried her daughter in it because she died at such a young age. And so we have all these family stories that we can piece together, the generations of the family of Khufu, all buried within this cemetery. But it doesn't just stop at the royalty and the elite. We have so much more. I had the privilege of asking Zahi what his greatest discovery ever was. Here was his reply. Tells you a lot about him as an archaeologist.
You know, every discovery has a story. And it's very interesting story. For example, when I was debating Graham Hancock and Robert Bofal and John Anton Weston, that time, they were talking about the pyramid and where is the workman. And it happened that I discovered the tombs of the pyramid builders located south of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And we found the lower cemetery of the workmen who moved the stones and the upper cemetery for the technicians. And we discovered inside 21 titles in hieroglyphic to tell us about the people who worked inside the pyramid. And also to the east, where Mark Leaner is excavating, and he found the area for sorting salted fish and the baker for making bread and the villages for the workmen. And we cannot ignore all of this.
We cannot ignore all of this evidence. We have the full web here at Giza, from Khufu to his royal family to the people who actually built the pyramid themselves. And they label themselves as the people who built the pyramids or who officiated the funerary cults after the death of the king. And at the center of this web is one of the most significant discoveries in Egypt of the 21st century. The Red Sea Scrolls, as they're called, or the papyri that were found at Wadi el-Jarf, Khufu's port, that imported resources from the Sinai Peninsula. All the copper that was used throughout the realm would have imported through this port. And there, these Red Sea Scrolls revealed what's known as the Diary of Merer, one of the individuals who worked on the Great Pyramid. Now, these scrolls are dated extremely clearly. Here's what Dr. Hawass has to say about them.
The Wadi al-Jarf papyri, one of the most important discovery that happened recently, that many people ignore this discovery because it's a diary of an overseer of a workman. His name was Merer. He had a title in hieroglyphic called Sahaj, means inspector. And he said, I was hired by Khufu to work in constructing his pyramid. And he said that his immediate boss, his name was Dedi. And Dedi is a tomb that they discovered west of the Great Pyramid.
In Giza, yeah.
And I published about 3 months ago. I published an article.
As Zahi notes, there's this web with Dedi. Dedi is one of the linchpins that shows the connections between written text and physical evidence. So one of the very coolest things about these papyri is the detail that is recorded within them. So for example, how do we know that they're moving stones to the Great Pyramid of Giza? Well, they identify it as going to the Akhet Khufu. Here, you've learned these hieroglyphs. Do you see the scribble that is the cartouche of Khufu right there? Do you see the ibis that means Akhet? And do you see the pyramid there in the lower left? This tells us where these were going. And these papyri were very clearly dated to the 27th year of Khufu's reign, just like those quarry marks we mentioned earlier in that mine for red pigment. This here is the tomb of Dedi and Debet, his wife. Zahi just published this tomb earlier this year. And what's really cool is the hieroglyphs label him as known to the king. So he was an important person. He was in charge of Mirror, who we heard is the inspector in the papyri Wadi al-Jarf. And Dedi was in charge of 4 different groups of workmen. And those workmen, for part of the year, we have their day journal every day. They move stones, limestone from Tura, the nice casing white limestone, to the Great Pyramid of Giza, used in the construction. But these tombs are really, really cool because they give us a sense of ordinary people. And that's just, it's so significant to not just think about the Egyptian past as just kings and queens, but these ordinary people that made up the fabric of society.
The tombs of the pyramid builders.
Okay.
Is really
finding
the
those
most
connections.
The most important one for many reasons. Archaeology and first time to understand about the common people. Because you have to understand that kings and queens and officials and nobles represent only 20% of population. The 80% are the public. The tombs of the pyramid builders are telling us life of the public, their religion, their food, their diet, everything about them. And this is why I really think, I wrote about this discovery more than 25 scientific articles and many books. And really, it is one of the most fascinating discovery that tells us a lot for the first time about the pyramid builders.
And it's not just the tombs themselves. It's the skeletal remains of these people who actually did the physical labor to build the pyramids that tells us the intimate details of their lives.
We found out that all the skeleton here of men and women had a stress on their back.
Okay.
Why?
Because they're moving 2-ton blocks?
Exactly! Yeah. Very smart guy.
And this is why you keep saying that aliens didn't build the pyramids, because the workers' bodies are literally here. This might be the coolest thing I've ever done. Thank you for having me do this, Zahi.
And so with all of this evidence, the physical evidence from the pyramid itself, the contextual evidence from Giza, we have such a very different perspective here upon which we can look at the Great Pyramid. It looks nothing like what all these fake archaeologists tell you. Now you can see the depth and the richness of what we have. But we can go even further. We can zoom out even further in time and space to put these pyramids within their historical context, as Zahi knows very well.
Great Pyramid is not only one pyramid that exists in the desert. If you look at the history of Egypt, you can see the architectural style for building a tomb from pre-dynastic until the late period. It's gradually understood. There is no gap between them.
This is one of the most important pieces of evidence that the Great Pyramid was actually funerary. It was a tomb. We can see the development, the stage by stage by stage development of royal tombs in Egypt. So for example, in the very first dynasties, the first and the second dynasty, they were building what were called bench tombs or mastabas. These were in a sense rectangular structures reminiscent of a mausoleum that you could see today in a cemetery, for example. Here's some examples from Saqqara. And in the first dynasty, one of these actually includes the very first steps that we see on a tomb. Tomb 3038 from the first dynasty in Saqqara. You can see these steps here in the image. And this all starts to come together when you compare different cemeteries. For example, when I was a student, I had the privilege of excavating in Egypt at Abydos. I got to talk about this with Zahi.
You have the sites in Upper Egypt that people never go. You have to Maydum, Amarna, Bani Hassan, Abydos, Asyut, Dandara. Only tourists, they fly and they go to Luxor and take a cruise to Aswan. But between this site, there are amazing sites that if you take a bus and you make a tour to Egypt, you will have the best sites in your life.
I'm with you. My favorite is Abydos because that's where I excavated back in 2004 with Matt Adams. And so
you worked with Matt Adams?
Yeah, in 2004 because I was a student at Penn. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I want to tell you that look at Abydos. It's a beautiful, unique site that contains the great temple of Seti the First and Ramses the Second, and the tombs of the kings of Dynasty 1 and the last two kings of Dynasty 2.
And this was my first lesson into the history of ancient Egypt. Abydos is the cemetery of the first and second dynasties. Right when Egypt, the Upper and Lower Egypt were united, the dynasties, this was their headquarters. This is where their tombs are. And it's here that we start to see in the second dynasty the first absolutely monumental funerary structures. These massive enclosures at Abydos that were the first example of really royal, monumental funerary architecture. And what's really cool is we can already see parallels to the Great Pyramid itself. So the last king of the second dynasty, Qasim Kemwi, his funerary enclosure is what we're looking at, this massive structure that we sometimes call the Shuna el-Zabib. And just off to the side of it are a series of boat burials, just like those boat burials found right off to the side of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The rituals, the context that we see with the depth of time, from generation to generation, the Egyptians are doing similar things to honor their dead pharaohs. And it's the very next pharaoh, the first pharaoh of the third dynasty, that makes the leap and puts these all together and invents the pyramid. Djoser and his architect Imhotep. And what we can see in the layout of the step pyramid is it started off as a mastaba, just a plain rectangular structure, not much different from those other mastabas that we saw at Saqqara. And then they decided to extend it and make it larger. And then they decided to build a smaller mastaba on top of the base and a smaller one on top of that. And then they even decided this small pyramid was too small. Let's extend it into the large step pyramid of Djoser that we now know and love. And let's surround it by a monumental enclosure very similar to those found at Abydos. This is where it all crystallizes together into the invention of a pyramid. And it's over the subsequent generations that we can see the experimentations in pyramid building to improve it one step after another. It was the first king of the fourth dynasty, Khufu's father, Sneferu, who actually made the next major leap in pyramid innovation. As we saw, some of the casing stones at the Red Pyramid, his final pyramid, dated to the 30th year of his reign, and another 1 to 4 years after that, so he lived for a long time. And in his time, he built 3 major pyramids. The second one, known as the Bent Pyramid, is the first attempt by the Egyptians to create a straight face to the pyramid. And the angle was too high, so they had to fix it and correct it as they went because the stone was starting to crack. But it was his third pyramid, the Red Pyramid, also known as the North Pyramid at Dashur, which is actually my favorite pyramid. I think it looks really nice. That was his final one and the first true straight pyramid that looks like a pyramid as we all know and love him. Built by Khufu's father, designed by Nefermat, who is Khufu's brother, the vizier to Sneferu. And guess who Nefermat is? He's the father of Hemiunu, who designed Khufu's pyramid. And it's in this way we can see step by step by step the development of these royal tombs, the invention of pyramids and their improvement over time that culminated in the apex that is the Great Pyramid. But we're not done yet. Egyptologists don't think that the pyramids are just tombs. They're far more than a tomb. Think about it. It's like all of our billionaires going to space right now. These are status symbols. They mark the status and power of these kings in an extremely visible way. They are symbolic and meaningful, and they are embedded within the fabric of Egyptian culture. So we have to stop thinking that Egyptologists think they're only tombs, because that's just not true. They're far more than that.
The pyramid was the national project of the whole nation. During the time of the Old Kingdom, there was the 3 millions who lived in Egypt in that time participated in building the pyramid. This is the job that the households in the south and the north wanted to do. In return, they did not pay taxes.
And this is what all these new discoveries, the Papyri Wadi al-Jarf, and old discoveries like the Palermo stone, and all the excavations that are going on around Egypt, they put together this larger fabric. The pyramids themselves were a national project. In many ways, Zahi Hawass and others have compared this to the space race. These were a point of national pride. They symbolized all of Egypt and the network through which we can put together the economic underpinnings of these pyramids show that it took the entire population of Egypt to build these pyramids. They had to build the city for the workers around it with all of its hub. They had to import materials from afar, copper, granite, different stones, pigment. They had to pull together everybody to work on these pyramids in shifts in order to get the job done. And other documents help provide this together. For example, the Palermo stone, which is the very first royal document from the Old Kingdom in Egypt. It in many ways documents the world's first historical narrative in some ways, showing the economics that underpinned one pharaoh to another. And so this Palermo stone documents the estates that were set up to support the construction and operation of different pyramids. For example, Sneferu created 35 estates with people from 122 farms. And as well, the estates of Sneferu are depicted, they're shown in the Valley Temple from the Bent Pyramid at Dashur. So we can see the offering of these gifts that would go towards the construction of the pyramids. In exchange, we know that they got tax relief. All this detail is hidden in the hieroglyphs that people don't want you to see. And that's not all. Once the pyramids were built, they continued in operation. They were not just a static tomb that was sitting there. No, we have, for example, from the 5th dynasty in Old Kingdom Egypt from Abu Sir, a series of papyri that have been found. And these papyri record the administration of pyramid temples, the cult that would take place at these pyramids after the death of the pharaoh, because they were not just tombs. These pharaohs were gods, so they were worshipped as gods. And sacrifices were made to the pharaohs afterwards. For example, the unfinished pyramid of Ran-Eferef, it mentions the sanctuary of the knife, where hundreds of cattle will be sacrificed in honor of the dead pharaoh. We're not going to sacrifice our cat here, don't worry. We love him very much. But what these kind of details show us is just how complex these structures were. To see them as something simple is the wrong way to go about it. They were embedded within the fabric of Egyptian society, from their construction to their administration for hundreds and thousands of years after the death of the pharaoh. And it's by putting together all this evidence, the known, the evidence from the textual historical record, the physical evidence from our archaeological sites, that we can start to see the interconnections between them from their context, their cultural, chronological, and spatial context, that we can build this foundation and have it reach the apex, have it get to the unknown to really understand what the pyramids are. But there's an unspoken problem here. Why have you not heard about the depth of all this evidence? Maybe some of you have, but I imagine most of you have not. And the problem is that these narratives, this history, is being hijacked by people who want you to ignore the evidence so that they can paint a fantasy as if it's real. And I asked Zahi about this, and he had some very interesting insights into it.
One good example. When people talk all the time that there is something hidden underneath the Sphinx. Yes. Okay? You have the Edgar Cayce, and you have John Anton West theory, and you have Boris Saïd. All these people had theories. And I really found out at the end, it's business. It's business. It's not science. Then people were saying all the time there is something hidden underneath the Sphinx. And people wanted to drill. When the Egyptian Antiquities Department refused that anyone could drill under the Sphinx, then they began to attack all of us.
Yeah.
But when we discovered that the water table began to appear in front of the Sphinx, we had a team from Cairo University under Dr. Hafiz. And this team, they came and they did drill 32 drilling underneath the left paw and the right paw and everywhere. If there is something that we discovered, how can we hide it? How we cannot announce it? We announced the facts. And this is really is the duty of good archaeologists. We work with facts. We do not dream. Dreamer is someone who has no scientific basis. If anyone have a new theory, I encourage him or her. Okay, publish your theory. Put it in paper. Then people can read it. But don't talk about your theory only in the media.
Zahi makes so many really excellent points here. It's really important to recognize that those selling these fantasy narratives, they're in business. They're making money from selling books, from getting your clicks and your attention. That is what this is. And in order to get you not to look at all of the hard evidence, the fact that Egyptologists have drilled throughout Giza, and what they found is the water table, just a few meters under the surface, there's nothing hidden there. And what has been discovered from these drillings and from the excavations has been published. I mean, after all, where do these narratives come from?
King's chamber shafts is what's collecting the microwaves. The Queen's chamber shafts have what you believe some chemicals in there.
Right.
And then what is happening with those chemicals?
They're mixing and boiling off hydrogen.
Okay, so they're creating hydrogen.
Right.
And what is the function of the space in those shafts? Is that help the chemical process? Is that what it is?
The space in the shafts.
Where they're filling them up with liquid?
Oh, yes. That is predetermined to make sure that they maintain the head pressure. The fittings, or the metal fittings, I describe as switches, like fluid switches. So when the fluid or the chemical was covering those metal fittings, I call them electrodes. There would be a closed circuit when the fluid level dropped. It would open the circuit and signal the need for more chemicals to be pumped in order to maintain the head pressure, in order to make sure that there is an accurate supply of that chemical.
And so that chemical would pool up inside of the Queen's chamber?
It would probably, yes. I mean, there's a lot that is missing from the Queen's chamber.
Oh my God, this is just so stupid. Where's the evidence? You talk about metal fittings. We have metal from the pyramids. You remember that robot that went into the air shaft of the Queen's chamber? We have copper on the blocking stone there. There's actually a piece of iron that Colonel Vise found in the Great Pyramid. Where are your metal fittings? Where are your electrodes? Where are your switches? Where is the evidence for these chemicals pooling up there? Why do they not leave stains? You say, oh, well, stains might not survive in the Great Pyramid. People have been in and out of it for thousands of years. Bullshit! We have stains in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramids. They've been studied intensively by Mark Lehner. And in fact, they show up across the roof of the granite ceiling. And what these are is this is the impression left from the resin from wooden beams that were there. They've been mapped out very closely by Mark Lehner, and they actually match with other physical evidence. For example, the great crack that goes through the large granite slab that makes up the ceiling of the chamber. Petrie was the first one to notice that this must have cracked during the construction of the pyramid. Why? because the crack was repaired with mortar. As Miroslav Werner describes, the crack very probably appeared before the pyramid was finished and must have been accompanied by an ear-splitting noise. Subsequently, the builders decided to consolidate the stability of the ceiling by inserting wooden beams under the ends of each ceiling block, as faint imprints of the wood on the ceiling indicate. We have this as physical traces that people can see. This is tangible evidence, the crack, the filling of the crack, and the beams that go across. What we don't have are electrodes, or evidence of chemicals, or even the space for an industrial operation. None of that stuff exists inside the Great Pyramid. We have evidence for what we have. Anything else that ignores our evidence is just fantasy.
Egyptology is fixed on the idea that the Great Pyramid is a tomb, and only a tomb.
And then it was built in about 20 years.
23 years.
Yeah.
Because if it's the tomb of Khufu, then it had to be built in 23 years because that was his reign.
Right.
He would start, in theory, building it at the beginning of his reign, and it's finished by the end of his reign. That's 23 years.
Can you see everything that's wrong here? First of all, Egyptologists have never said that the pyramid is only a tomb. They've said it's a temple. They've talked about how it's a cosmic reincarnation machine for the pharaohs to go to the afterlife. They have talked about the operation and administration of these. They have talked about it being a national project akin to the space race. Never have they claimed it's just a tomb. Second of all, the dates are completely wrong. Graham, people respect you, and you're saying Khufu's reign is 23 years? Egyptologists have known for a long time that Khufu's reign is up to at least 27 years due to that quarry mark at Dakhla and the Red Sea papyri, the papyri Wadi al-Jarf that we discussed, both of which mention Khufu's 27th or 28th year of reign. So, do your homework, man. If you expect people to listen to you, you got to get things right and stop misrepresenting what archaeologists and Egyptologists say. Now, we've all heard, for example, about the recent find that apparently there's these major megastructures under the pyramid. So I had to ask Zahi about what he thought about these.
Because the techniques that the Italian used to say that 600 feet under the second pyramid, there is 8 pillars. I'm not a technician to know that, but I took what they published, I gave it to scientists, and they said this is not true.
Yeah,
now,
I had Dr. Sarah Parkak on my channel, and we discussed it.
If it's true, why you have 8 pillars inside underneath the second pillar? Why?
Plus, they'd be underwater. They'd be underwater under the water table.
It doesn't make any sense of what they're claiming. And if those scientists published an article in a scientific journal that has referees, because if you publish an article in a respected journal, they take your article and they give it to scientists to say if your theory is correct or not. But those people paid money to publish this article.
And this article is not even published. It's just been presented to the public. And this is really key. Everybody, millions of people are taking the words of these Italian team who have never published their results. They've never actually gone to they've never shared their data. No data is available for comparison. The reality is we know for 100% that there could not be major megastructures underneath the pyramids. Why? Because the pyramids were built on solid bedrock. Khufu and his team, under Hemiunu, they carved out the entire Giza Plateau down to bedrock to create a solid foundation upon which the pyramid was built. And just a few meters underneath that, sometimes 10, sometimes 20 meters underneath it, is water. The water table is right there, and it would have been there in the past as well. So we know for sure that there's nothing 2,000 meters below because it would be underwater. It would be a city for mermaids and mermen, not a city for actual people. And this is why when you hear these kind of claims just presented to the public and not verified, tested, and confirmed by other scientists and other scholars, you should have a heavy dose of doubt. Because in the end, this industry of fake archaeology is really just built on ignoring the actual evidence and just straight up lying to you about how archaeology works.
Buried beneath Egypt's sands.
I'm telling you, that this is a big lie.
Of course.
Because when you work in Egypt, first of all, there is a committee called the Permanent Committee.
Mm-hmm.
In my time, this committee consists of 60 scholars. They are the only ones who can approve or disapprove any work.
Yeah.
Now, I am not in the committee. I apply like anyone to take a permission to work in Egypt. I had no power to stop any work of anyone. I have no power to permit anyone to work in Egypt. I am an independent Egyptologist. They need to understand that there is a head of antiquities, and there is a minister of antiquities, and there is a committee who decides for any work to happen. Then this is a big lie.
It's all just a lie. It's all just a lie. Everything you've heard about Zahi Hawass online, all the negative insults thrown at him, they're just making up shit. It's completely unfair to blame one individual because you're frustrated because you want the pyramids to be power plants or whatnot. And the reality is this gets very personal sometimes. And so I really want to make sure that you hear the message that he has for all the trolls.
I am not in a war with them. I don't understand why those people are making a war against me. I don't understand the reason for that. I just opened my email today and I found someone writing a very bad email, insulting me. And also yesterday, the same, every day.
Yeah.
You know what I do? I never read it. I just delete it. And I want to tell them, that all what they think, no one really can respect someone who has this manner. How can you write an email to someone and insult him? I can do the same, but my culture and my manner, I can face you with what I think. But to write an email that no one really can answer and insult someone, that's really to show that this person is stupid. And I'm telling him, maybe he's going to hear us, he will go to the garbage of history.
Powerful words from Dr. Zahi Hawass. Those of you who are trolls, you will end up in the garbage of history. And if there's anybody that understands the difference between the pillar of history, the Great Pyramid, and the garbage of history, it is Dr. Zahi Hawass, who has dug through so many secrets from the sand. We can take a lesson here from ancient Egypt itself. The ancient Egyptians, they wanted their names, their deeds, to stand the test of time. For example, Prince Nefermat, the son and the Grand Vizier of Sneferu, who designed Sneferu's pyramids, he was also the brother of Khufu, and he was the father of Hemiunu, the architect and vizier of Khufu who designed the Great Pyramid. In Nefermet's tomb, next to Sneferu's pyramid, he carved out his hieroglyphs extremely deep and painted them with brilliant colors. And those hieroglyphs, next to his own image, said,
"He made his hieroglyphs in writing that cannot be erased."
This is what history is made from. Carve your fate into stone, the glory of your deeds, and stop these lies. Stop this petty trolling. It just gets in the way of everybody who has real curiosity about the past. The final thing I talked to Zahi about was the future of discovery in Egypt, and he had a lot of exciting things to say. He's clearly excited for what's to come. Big questions about Egyptian archaeology do you think might be able to be answered in the next 10 to 20 years?
I think you still need to answer many important things about some discoveries that can happen by accident, like the tomb of Cleopatra, Alexander the Great, or also in the Valley of the Kings, you know, that the queens of Dynasty 18 and their children buried somewhere, we don't really know. Also, the tomb of Amenhotep I and Ramses VIII was not found yet. And then there is many things that we are waiting for future excavation to reveal many secrets about ancient Egypt.
I mean, the depth of our evidence is just so apparent. It's not that we don't know what we have left to discover. We know exactly which individuals, whose tombs we don't have, because we have the tombs of so many of the kings and queens and princes and royalty from ancient Egypt. That is just a level of precision that needs to be admired. The wealth of our evidence, that it shows you just how granular we know what's left to find. There's known knowns and there's known unknowns. And I'm sure there's a few unknown unknowns as well. But one of the coolest things I got to talk with Zahi about was his legacy for the field of Egyptology. And I really liked his answer here. This was really cool. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is obviously Egypt has a large history of colonialism in Egyptology. And I was wondering how you have tried to reform the country and to train future archaeologists so that local Egyptology can stand on its own 2 feet in a stronger way.
No, before I came to be the head of Antiquities, first archaeology were in the hand of foreigners only.
Mm-hmm.
And Egyptians were helping. Serving, actually, not helping. We are not against foreigner at all. No. We need to encourage them, but we need to be equal to them. You can't come in my country and work, and I can serve you only. I became the head of Antiquities. I said one thing. We need to participate in our history. But to do that, you have to be well-trained.
Mm-hmm.
Then I sent many people to study outside. And I began to do for the first time training for excavation techniques, conservation, and I made this through many people in Egypt. And when I trained these young people, they're incredible. All my discoveries now is because of these people that I trained. We have now 250 foreign expeditions working in Egypt.
Wow.
But our work, or my work especially, is really recognized because the people that I trained are working with me, and we are working in major important sites, and we make major important discoveries. Then now, for the first time, you can see Egyptians and foreigners equally working in the site. And this is some of the most important achievements that I really did in my career.
Yeah, you should be very proud of that. I think that's really important. And what this really shows is Zahi's humility. It's not just about him and his discoveries. It's about building a foundation upon which Egyptology can move into the future, led by local Egyptian archaeologists. And Zahi really deserves credit for helping develop this legacy of his and build out, we talked about the network at Giza. It's the network of scholars and professionals that are working in this new age of discovery. But the last question that I asked Zahi is, what scares him the most about the future?
It's the monuments. I'm afraid that these monuments, it can be deteriorated completely. Everyone is interested in excavation and making discoveries, but very rare people who talk about conservation. Then I need foreign expeditions to think more about making conferences to make a plan for the future of Egyptology. We need tourist people to sit down with archaeologists in every country, not only in Egypt, and to think how can these monuments can be protected? How can we change the system of the visit? 15,000 people go inside tombs in the Valley of the Kings in the morning, all of them, every day. Bags touching the inscription and breathing and taking photos with flashes. And all of these sites are not made for tourists. And therefore, we need really to think about the future. This is really what bothers me. We need people to stop talking about all these idiots things that happening and think about this. Monuments are really our heritage, our history. We need to be protect that. And therefore, we need to sit, all of us together, and write a plan for the future to protect this incredible heritage, not only of Egypt, but of others also.
I think that's one of the more interesting things about some of the discoveries you've made is they've come across while you're thinking about conservation plans. So, you know, the drilling that you mentioned near the Sphinx, or even the Abu Sir reliefs that you mentioned, that was discovered while building the rampway and stuff like that. And you've shown how conservation and discovery can go together.
Exactly. You know, I think one of the most great projects that I did in my life was also the Step Pyramid. The Step Pyramid was falling apart with the South Tomb. For 14 years, major important project, conservation. The Serapeum, there was cracks in the ceiling. We restored it. Also, the Sphinx. The Sphinx was restored badly all the time. Major important project that I did for the conservation of the Sphinx.
This is the perspective of a true professional. Someone who's concerned about the heritage and the well-being of these monuments, not just about discovery. And while going about how to protect these monuments, that's how discoveries are made, because you're paying such close attention to the physical evidence that is there, that can be documented and shared, and then build that foundation upon. So it was absolutely an honor to speak to Zahi Hawass. I've been thinking and writing about Egypt for the book that I'm writing, and I made a really cool discovery. There's one more myth about the pyramids that I need to debunk in my next video coming up soon, and that's this one.
You know what's far more out there is suggesting that it was a tomb for the pharaohs. Like, they've never
Flint, Dibble.
Yeah, they have never found. Never mind, they never found a mummy in any Egyptian pyramid ever. Because you could say, oh, they looted it. Okay, fine. Never mind that there's no glyphs on any of the walls. Like you'll find at every single other known Egyptian tomb.
But none of that's true. There are hieroglyphs in the pyramids, including in the Great Pyramid. There are mummies that have been found in multiple pyramids. And guess what? I think I've found evidence for what happened with Khufu's mummy. I have direct documentary evidence of Khufu's mummy and what has happened to it. Wow, that was a great big video for a great big pyramid. This monument inspires so much fantasy. It's just amazing. But I hoped you all enjoyed drilling down into the solid evidence in its core. Look, if you enjoyed this, let's make more similarly high quality videos. So leave a comment telling me what you think. Give it a like, give it a hype, give it a share. Let's make this work. Like right now. A big thank you to Zahi Hawass. It was a real pleasure chatting with him. I got a totally different perspective meeting him in that video chat than he normally has in the public. He was so chill, actually. I was surprised. But no, I really want to thank you so much for your time. It was an honor to meet you. And also a huge thank you to NEXT for sharing video footage inside the pyramid, and to Dan Fallu for lending his voice for the audio parts. Thank you. Love and archaeology to everybody.
Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, Flint, Dibble.